Bournemouth against Arsenal, one of the more enticing matchups of the weekend, I would say. Thank you very much for that message, Gian Batra. Appreciate your support. So yeah, Bournemouth against Arsenal, 5:30 televised kickoff at the Vitality. It's been an inconsistent start for the Cherries. They've been sort of one of the more difficult teams to predict, I would say. They currently sit in 13 with a mixed bag of results, and last time they were beaten by Leicester at the King Power. Obviously not an ideal sort of result given that they were favourites and they did create a lot of chances in that game. For Arsenal, they were able to extend their unbeaten league run with victory over Southampton in their previous outing. It was a very similar game to the one before that against Leicester. I think it was sort of complete domination from Arsenal, but they made the game a lot harder than it should have been in the end. But again, as all good teams do, they got the victory. In terms of the injury report for Bournemouth, it's only Tyler Adams listed, which is obviously a good sign for Iraola. He's got pretty much a full contingent available to him with no changes over the international break. However, Arsenal have a much more extensive injury list, with Odegaard the only one really certainly out. You've got Ben White, Timber, Saka, Havertz, Partey and Martinelli all listed as doubtful. So it's probably worth waiting for the sort of Arteta press conference. But I would imagine a lot of these guys are ready to start on Sunday evening. So with that in mind, I think I'll give my prediction on how the game will go, because that sort of plays a pretty big bearing over the bets for this. So Arsenal last season won this game 3-0 and 4-0, so they were very, very comfortable against Bournemouth. And I think stylistically they should be, because sort of Bournemouth's main sort of threat comes from their attack. I think they're very forward-thinking, they're very progressive, and they tend to outscore teams rather than sort of keep them out. They're not a very defensive team, they're not very compact. They do allow their opponents to have chances. But I think Arsenal have the perfect antidote to their attack. I think Arsenal are obviously the best defensive team in the league, probably in the world right now. And as I say, they kept 2 clean sheets against Bournemouth last season. So I don't think they'll be too worried about sort of how attack-minded Bournemouth will be. And I think because of that, they can really cause problems on the break. And I think, thinking about how they match up, I think Arsenal come into this game in really good form. And I think they'll really cause Bournemouth a ton of problems on the break. And because of that, I do think Arsenal win this game relatively comfortably. Of course, that could be quite wrong, but I'm going to assume Arsenal are very comfortable victors in this game. And because of that, I do think they'll sort of naturally tend to sit deeper and concede possession. I think when Arsenal do take the lead, they are a bit more relaxed in their approach. They look to sort of utilise their sort of counter-attacking proficiencies, and that could be really dangerous against the Bournemouth side, who can look quite vulnerable in transition. And we saw that happen in both games last season between these two. So because of that, assuming an Arsenal lead is probable, I think Lewis Cook passes is a natural target. If we look into his data last season, Cook made 43 passes at the Emirates and 50 passes at home, so covered this line relatively easily. For the season, he's over this line in 4 out of 7. That includes 58 passes in the previous game against Leicester, who obviously took the lead early, sat a bit deeper, which is a sort of similar approach to which I hope Arsenal will have. He's also over this line against against Liverpool at Anfield and Newcastle at home. So he's shown he can sort of cover this line in tougher matchups. And he's covered it in both head-to-head games last season. So over 39.5 passes at 1.83 with Bet365 is the first angle for me. Potentially a ladder there, up to sort of the 42.5. Just hoping that line doesn't shift too much, but that's what it is at the moment. Again, before the international break, I did mention that we've seen a sort of tactical shift from Arsenal, which has seen them sort of reverse how their centre-backs sort of approach the game. We've seen Gabriel be a bit more reserved and Saliba sort of take on the role as the more aggressive in the pairing. And because of that, we've seen an uptick in tackles for Saliba. So he's made at least 2 tackles in 8 out of 9 games this season. And we see him sort of drawn out of position a little bit more, but he's also fantastically adept in his duels. He's very strong in his challenges. And because of that, he's dribbled past very few times and he's very efficient in his tackles. So naturally, that makes him one to target. He's actually priced at 1.66 for 2 tackles, which, given that it's landed in 8 out of 9, looks a really good price on the surface. Also, you need to consider that it's a good matchup against Bournemouth, a team who sort of play very direct. They look to get the ball into the feet of their striker as often as possible. So I think because of that, we should see plenty of involvement for Saliba on the defensive front, and therefore I really like that price. 1.66 is obviously a little bit too short to back as a single. So the sort of angle I have in mind is for a Bournemouth player to have a shot. I think it was, for me, a toss-up between Tavernier and Semenyo to have at least one shot. But I've gone for Tavernier in the end. I think that's a smarter approach because he's the higher price, first of all. But he also plays in a more central role. He'll be on free kicks and he tends to shoot more often from distance, which could be useful against a team like Arsenal where sort of clear-cut chances could be less common. He's had a shot in all 8 games this season, including 1 at Anfield, 2 against Chelsea, 2 against Newcastle. So again, he's shown that he can sort of cover this line in sort of tougher matchups. And the double, so Saliba over 1.5 tackles and Tavernier to have 1 shot, comes out at 1.9, which I think is a really, really nice double. Looks good value on the surface. Next up, I'm going to stick with Bet365, but this time targeting fouls. So Christie is the first man to target. He's priced at 1.36 to commit a foul with 365. And I think even without looking at the data, just off the eye test, you can immediately see that Christie is going to be a good person to target for fouls. He presses very intensely, quite clumsily at times, and therefore he sees himself in a lot of duels. He's made a foul in 7 out of 8 appearances this season, and he made 3 fouls the last time he faced Arsenal. So really like him for at least 1 foul. Again, potential to ladder. And pairing that with Calafiori to make a foul for Arsenal. So he's expected to start at right back on Saturday evening, which should put him in direct duels with Antoine Semenyo, which is a really, really nice matchup to target, I think, given how much of the ball Semenyo sees generally for Bournemouth. He's also drawn a foul in each of his last 6 games. Meanwhile, Calafiori, since sort of starting this season, has an average of 2.16 fouls per 90, which is a very, very high total, and he's made a foul in all 5 of his starts. So notable data, carded in 3 of his games too. So really good data, really good matchup, and the double of Christie foul and Calafiori foul comes out at 1.95. So again, really, really nice price, and I think there is potential to ladder there as well, especially if sort of Calafiori can see somewhere close to the 90. So when he's played the 90, he's made at least 2 fouls in 2 out of 3 games. So it's an enticing matchup. I also would like to double down on a long shot for this game where I sort of put all the angles together. And I'll be posting that, sort of confirming that on Twitter again. So make sure you're following me, hoping that the sort of odds hold. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't. But yeah, make sure you're following me on Twitter. I'll have that posted tomorrow, hopefully.